The Streets of Truth or Consequences, a Campo Espinoso production, starring Ferdinand Foch, Clyde Tingley, William Austin, Blackjack Pershing, and a host of others. It was about a century ago, or a little more, that the people living in a community called Palomas Hot Springs decided to organize themselves and incorporate as a village. The village was named Hot Springs, New Mexico, and a few years later, the first plat of the town site of Hot Springs, New Mexico was drawn by a government surveyor named Robert Clark. Mr. Clark drew the maps of the town as it existed and the plans for the town as they thought it would grow. You'll see on those early maps that things like Bullard Street and Wilson Avenue were planned, though they may never have come to fruition in the actual building of the town site. Palomas Hot Springs, or Hot Springs as it was known now, had pretty much grown as a result of the hot springs that were there and as a result of the project building the Elephant Butte Dam. So there was something of a hodgepodge of buildings, there were some swampy areas, and the whole place was not organized the way a modern city or village has to be organized. So the early maps were an attempt to impose some kind of order on what was already there, taking into account the streets that people were already using, the hills, the river, and the other geographical factors. Another factor that affected how they organized the city was the fact that World War I had recently been concluded, and there were figures like Ferdinand Foch and Blackjack Pershing who were international heroes who had beaten the Germans in the war to end all wars. Some of these people, like Philippe Pétain of the French army, had streets named after them here in Truth or Consequences, though Pétain's name disappeared when Broadway was built. One of the first concepts that they had for putting together a city and its streets was to have an alphabetical group of tree streets. Ash Street, Birch Street, Cedar Street. These were north-south streets, and they were organized in an alphabetical way. So what happened is you could find out pretty much if you were on Date Street and you wanted to find an address on Cedar, you knew that that was 1 block away. However, after D, they ran into trouble because they hit Pershing Street and they were not going to rename Pershing Street, so they left it there. So it goes A, B, C, P, and then they went back to it. They ended up with Fir Street, and then Grape Street, maintaining the alphabetical order in which they originally conceived. So when you get down to the street that should start with the letter H, for many years it was Hazel Street, and Hazel Street later was renamed and connected to the street in the downtown area that was Foch Street, once again the hero of the First World War. So now it goes Fir, Grape, and then Foch. But then, undaunted, they went on naming the streets. The I Street was Ivy, J was Juniper, K was Copra, and L was Locust. And then when they were hitting the hill, that's pretty much where they stopped that series of street development. So for a while there, you've got an ABC scheme with a few minor adjustments in true TRC style. This is a traditional old 4x4 street sign. That's what they used to be, just with the names of the two streets stenciled on it. A few still survive. The other scheme they had was to take the streets that ran the other way. If the tree streets, the ABC tree streets, were north-south, then east-west they were going to do numbered streets. And so they came up with this system where they numbered actually 9 streets. 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, which sounds very logical, and it was at the time. However, when they built the original streets after Broadway, the first street going north was 9th Street, and the next street was 8th Street, and the next street was 7th Street, and the numbers went down as you went farther north. This, at a later date, they decided this was not a very good arrangement, so what they did is they flip-flopped the streets. And what used to be 9th Street became 1st Street, and what used to be 8th Street became 2nd Street, etc. So while there may be structures there that had been there from the original development, their street names and their addresses were changed over the years. Now, the third concept for street names in Truth or Consequences is to name them after prominent local people. And 3 streets actually reflect some of the first 3 builders: Austin, McElroy, and Mar were three of the very first builders who helped make the downtown TRC area happen. Van Patten, on the other hand, was named after the captain of the U.S. Army who had fought Apaches in the area. Mims was named after Pop Mims, who had been a mayor and developer. And another developer, Ashbaugh, is one who is alive today. That's a very recent street where Walmart is. Now, Henson was also an early developer, and Myrtle was the wife of a developer, Dave Gray. Their streets were moved out south after an accident on Red Hill near Winston, killed Wyona and injured Charlie Henson, and streets were named after them. The next concept was to take the names of metals, because Sierra County had been established as a mining community, and to name a whole neighborhood of streets after metals. So you go down South Broadway, you'll hit copper, iron, aluminum, platinum, tungsten, nickel, and other streets that now comprise a neighborhood. And someone says, well, I live on one of the metal streets, you know pretty much where they live, unless they live on Gold Street or Silver Street, because those are in a totally different part of town, which is part of what gives our city its charm. Other prominent citizens who earned street names were Coleman, a very popular newspaper family, Jewell, who was a relative of one of the developers, Corbett, who was a councilman and developer, and Tingley, after Clyde and Carrie Tingley, the governor and his wife, who formed the Carrie Tingley Hospital here in TRC. We hope that you've enjoyed this very brief tour of the streets of Truth or Consequences, and that this gives a little more meaning to all the street names that you run into as you drive through the town. Thank you for your attention, and this has been The Streets of Truth or Consequences, as prepared as part of the New Mexico Centennial in the year 2012.